right, game tight, elevate your mind sight. These interviews will ignite your insight. Take notice of the lessons we learned. Why? So you can focus on shining your light bright. We share our greatness and we're courageous. Listen closely because it is contagious. Hit the subscribe. The show's worldwide. Keep an open mind and treasure yourself to shine.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Mind Right Game Tight Show. I'm your host, Michelle Morgan. I'm a transformational sports coach, which means I work with student athletes on the mindset of sports and in life. I am also the founder of the nonprofit Vida Soto, and Vida Soto is dedicated to empowering our young adults and student athletes in seeing the light that shines with them, in terms of letting that light shine as well for themselves and to their world, their communities, their families, and well. I also created the Mind Right Game Type program, which is a curriculum that consists of 2 books, How You Triumph in Sports, Tools That Create a Triumphant Life, the book and the workbook. So the book has all the information, the different life skills that we're learning while playing sports, and the workbook has the exercises. For more information, you can go to www.vidasoto.org. And just a reminder, if you've missed any of our previous episodes, please check them out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and then, of course, YouTube by going to www.mindrightgametype.com. All right, today, jumping into the great stuff. Our guest today is Dr. Sarah Lepe, also known as Coach Sarah. She's a former Division I volleyball player and founder of Rebranded Athlete. With over a decade of educational leadership experience, being a classroom teacher and a school site administrator, she helped build strong school culture and community at her school sites. Athletics played a tremendous role throughout her life, and especially in pursuing her career goals. After the final whistle of her last game, little did she know what a challenge it would be to transition out of athletics and pursue her career. She is passionate about helping athletes understand their potential and drive them towards their purpose as they make the transition out of athletics and becoming change leaders in the world. So thank you. And Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So before we get into Rebranded Athlete, I kind of just want to introduce you to our audience. So if you can just share a little bit about yourself and then how and why you started playing volleyball. So kind of starting into the student athlete of you.
Yeah, for sure. So Michelle and I actually grew up in the same town. So we went to school together a long time ago, both athletes. Michelle, a lot of people told us in high school we looked alike. So
they did. Are you guys sisters?
All the time. And people still get me confused with you. And I'm sure you have the same thing happen around town.
Yes. And if you're like, what do they look like? Go to YouTube or go to Spotify. You're going to see what people are talking about.
Exactly. So yeah, I was, like you said in my bio, as a school teacher and a principal for the last 12 years. I went to Cal State Fullerton. I played volleyball for them on a full ride scholarship. Very fortunate to do so. I ended up playing 1 year more than what I had anticipated. I blew out my ACL my freshman year. I'm sure we'll get into my story a little bit more deeper about that. But, that landed me a year to really try to figure things out. And in turn, I think it kind of made me a little bit more lost in the process. So that transition out of athletics was difficult for me. I had played volleyball since the age of 8, had been around the sport since the age of 5, and really had just been a volleyball player. That's all I knew myself as Sarah, the volleyball player. So when that was gone, I really didn't know what was next. Although I had a plan, just like every athlete does. It's like, okay, I'm going to go to school again and, figure things out. I really didn't know what was ahead of me as far as figuring out the life part of it. And so throughout my transition, I finally became a teacher and a school principal, which was not as easy as it sounds on paper. During the time, it was during the recession. It was difficult to get a job at the time. And so when I look back at my life where I had a really hard time becoming who I was supposed to become, it was during those 6 years in between my sport and my career that I was really trying to navigate things. So Rebranded Athlete was born actually during the pandemic, when I finally had a moment to settle down and go inward a little bit to see what I could really do to help serve people on a higher level. And going back to the athlete in me, I've always had that. And I think that's why I've had so much success, even moving up quickly as a school teacher to a principal within a short amount of time, because of the leadership skills coachability and really just the drive as an athlete that I've had. And I soon discovered when I got to that type of a role, other people who were around me who were very successful were also athletes and had that athletic background. So that's really what had sparked the interest with me starting Rebranded Athlete. And I've been on that journey now for a little bit over 2 years. It began as a side hustle, passion project. And then I decided that, this was something I really wanted to explore. So I ended up leaving my job as a principal for the last 6 years and jumped into this just this past year in July of 2021. And I haven't looked back, and every day has been a new challenge. And I think that athletes, like I know I heard it before, athletes make great entrepreneurs, but I really have been able to see that in the last year and a half or so of me really beginning to not only start Rebranded Athlete, but it's opened other doors of opportunities for me as well. Yeah.
Awesome. And congratulations on going, full time into Rebranded Athlete. I think that's something to, for me to acknowledge, because I understand what that looks like. And, just believing in yourself, really. And so I applaud you for that. And then I want to ask you questions about your high school experience, because we'll have student athletes listening to this. And you committed to Cal State Fullerton as a junior in high school. And what, knowing that you were committing as a junior, did you feel like how did you know you were making that decision, the best decision for yourself? Were you like, oh, I want to see if this other school is interested, or how did you make that decision for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really didn't think even college was on my radar when I first started playing volleyball at a young age. I just played it for fun. And then when I got to middle school, that's kind of, I think everybody goes through that awkward stage. And then things just finally started making sense. And I started to get pretty good in junior high. And that's when universities were just starting to look at me. And so every year we would go to this summer volleyball camp up at UC Davis. And this was the big volleyball festival for all clubs. And there were college recruits everywhere. I mean, as a little kid, I just remember seeing all these different people with the logos, from different universities. I'm like, wow, how cool would that be to be able to play this sport in college? And so when I was in eighth grade, that's actually when I first had a couple of recruiters that were talking to my dad as I was playing. And I was just like, this actually might be a thing that I want to pursue. And so as I got into high school, that's when, the recruiting process started to kick up. I was the first one in my family to really go through that process, aside from my aunt, who had, played in college, but wasn't recruited as I was. So it was a very, I don't want to say difficult, but very uncertain time, because there's so many things that you just don't know about being recruited. And so one of the things was that a lot of different universities were starting to send me letters, and they would, the phone calls. I don't remember what the rules were back then. I know things are different now, but there's certain times when colleges can actually reach out to prospects and things like that. And so things started to get pretty serious my sophomore year. And I remember just every time I went to the mailbox, there would be a different letter from a different university. And I just remember feeling so overwhelmed, because it's oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do next? And I really had my heart set on UC Santa Barbara for a couple of reasons. One, it was close to home, literally about 30 to 40 minutes away, so I wouldn't be too far. The second part was that it was a very prestigious volleyball program. And I really wanted to play for the coach at the time, because it was just, something that, I don't know, I was being kind of drawn to. And I even went to the summer camp and all that type of stuff. And she's like, yeah, I'm definitely going to reach out, we'll have you come for a visit. All these things had happened. And it was, at the end of the day, it's a real long story with that, but broken promises, and it didn't happen. So I had other schools looking at me, and they were offering me visits, the overnight visits to come and visit the campus, to stay with the girls. And Fullerton was the one that was really pursuing me. And I had no idea what Fullerton was, where it was at. I thought it was out of state, because I'd never heard of it before. And when I started to look a little bit further, I was like, well, it's not that far away. Let me see what this coach is all about, because like, literally every weekend we go, like she was talking to my coach, talking to my dad. She couldn't talk to me because of the rules and regulations, but all the time they were bugging. So I'm like, okay, let me see what this school is all about. So I ended up doing the unofficial visit where they actually came to our home, sat with my parents, and we talked about, their program and what they saw for me and all that type of stuff. And at the time I was thinking about going into teaching. Fullerton had one of the best teaching programs, at least in the state, if not nation. So that kind of was like in alignment for me as well. And then it wasn't until I actually went on that college recruiting trip to Cal State Fullerton that it wasn't so much the school, because at the time Fullerton looks so much different than it does now. Back then it really looked like a community college, and now it looks like the big university, as it should be. But what really drew me to that university was the team. And I felt at home with the girls because it was very similar. It was a very similar vibe to what I had in high school. And things just immediately clicked. And I could just tell. And I had this feeling like this is where I was supposed to be. And so usually your recruiting trip is 2 days, and not even like, I think the first like 4 or 5 hours into my recruiting trip, we were watching the girls play that night. I had hung out with the girls, and then we went to the gym to go watch everybody play. And when I sat down, the coaches were there in front of me, and they had turned around and they're like, "So what do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm ready." And I still remember the look on the assistant coach's face. And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like I'm ready to commit." And then my parents were there too. And they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I feel at home." And so that, and I know for everybody, like that's not how it happens. It's just one of those things that it felt like the right place and time. And I still believe to this day, that's exactly where I was supposed to be. And more so because I was being recruited to some top schools like University of Hawaii, UC Davis, San Diego, Texas, like big time schools. I could have had my pick and gone to any of those and probably be guaranteed a league championship and maybe, a bid at the NCAA tournament. But I have always had that underdog mentality. And even at Oxnard High School, when we were there too, like I just remember like helping that program grow and seeing how it is now. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to go in some place knowing that, yeah, I may not get that championship ring, but I know that I'm going to be able to help set the foundation for more girls and more of the program after me. So the cool part about that story is after I left, so Fullerton, when I was being recruited, they were like dead last in the Big West Conference. And mind you, at the time, the Big West Conference when I played was a very elite conference. There were a lot of athletes who went on to play for Team USA volleyball. They went pro, like all kinds of different stuff. So it was very competitive. By the time I finished as a senior, we finished mid-conference at 5th place out of 10. And then 3 years after I left, Cal State Fullerton ended up winning the Big West Championship. So
Wow.
I feel like we were part of laying down that foundation, and I helped to get them there.
Yeah, for sure. And then even going back to like you saying you want to be recruited by like UC Santa Barbara. And I think as a student athlete, maybe most of us have like that dream school that we have in mind. And how did you allow yourself to, whatever the process looked like, the coach said like, "Hey, I'm going to be in contact." And then there was broken promises, which happens in sports. But how did you allow yourself to say like, I'm still going to be open to the other schools and not just keep hanging on to UC Santa Barbara?
Yeah, I think part of it is definitely having support. I was talking to my parents a lot about what I wanted at the time. And then also knowing that what somebody told me before I actually picked Fullerton as well. And I think this is great advice for anybody that's looking to, play on a full ride someplace. Pick a school that you would go to, even if you weren't on a full ride, because chances are something could happen and your athleticism, you could get injured. Something could happen where you won't be able to play anymore. Is that still a university that you would want to go to? So I kept my options open. And again, like when I showed up at Fullerton, it was, more than just the girls with the volleyball program. It was also, the academics that were at that university. So really taking a look at that. But as far as getting my mindset right, I think part of me, and I'll totally admit it, wanted to play for another school that was in the Big West so that I could play against Santa Barbara. And the cool part about that story too is my senior year, that coach came up to me when we were playing at UC Santa Barbara. So it was our last time playing over there away. She came up to me afterwards and she told me, she's like, I really should have given you the opportunity, and I wish you would have played for me, because every year we would go and see her, and she knew, how I felt about it. And actually my coach did as well. They were, not rivals, but, they were good buddies as far as like coaching and things like that. So they would talk about that as well. Cause my coach knew I really wanted to go to UC Santa Barbara, but in the end I think things always work out the way that they're supposed to. And that's the other thing, is just kind of trusting the process and keeping your options open, because as much as I was heartbroken about UC Santa Barbara, there was a whole other world out there. And if it wasn't Fullerton, I'm sure there would have been another school, that I could have played for and, been part of, and I would have found my way and found my home. So it's really about us keeping our mindset open and perspective and allowing ourselves to enjoy the process and not get caught up in like, oh man, what if I would have gone to that school?
Yeah. Or I'm going to hold off on Fullerton because I know Santa Barbara is going to come calling at some point. And then next thing you know, Fullerton has already, got all their scholarships filled and you're still waiting on Santa Barbara. So, I mean, I love that. Like in terms of like, go to a school that you would go to, even if you weren't playing sports. That's so true, because like the city you're in, the people, all that stuff matters, not just the sports. And then, so tell me, like, what was your work ethic like in high school, on and off the court? Because I mean, yes, we know you're a great athlete and academic as well, but like what kept you going and what type of work ethic did you have to, get to that level and see yourself, get a scholarship and play in that conference with, amazing volleyball players as well?
I always had to find a way to do what maybe other people weren't doing. And I think that's part of being like the elite athlete. Like even though like you have your team, like there's still extra reps, there's still extra things that you can do to help yourself get to the next level. In high school, I remember working one summer, and I'm talking working with my parents, like chores, right? I did all kinds of yard work one summer because I had to have these jump soles. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh, we had jump soles on the team actually at Oxnard. Yeah, we had
They're so bad for your knees now, but back then nobody knew, right? We just wanted to have a higher vertical. And I remember that's what I wanted, because once I figured out, okay, like I really want to get to the next level, I know I'm going to have to jump higher. I'm going to have to be faster. And even though like, in Oxnard, I'm tall, 5'11". In college world, that's like below average.
So you're as short as me in basketball. Got it.
Yeah. Had to make up for it somehow, because most of the girls, especially when I played middle, I was going up against girls that were 6'6", and I'm 5'11", so you got to make up that difference there. And so I was blessed to have a big vertical. I would hope that the jump soles that I worked so hard to have and then used helped me with my vertical. I still believe that they did. I used to be able to touch the rim of the basketball hoop, just grace it. Nowadays, I'm not sure, but
you got to bring out your jump soles again.
Yeah, no, those are long gone. Yeah, but really setting yourself aside from everybody else, because although all of my teammates, like I know everybody worked hard, but I still saw myself a little bit different just because I was putting in the extra reps when I needed to. I was, talking to my coaches, like, what could I do to make myself better on the court? And I look back now, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was doing visualization, whether I knew it at the time or not. Like I still remember, and again, because I wanted to go to UC Santa Barbara, like I still visualize myself like in my car, like the dream car I wanted, driving to UC Santa Barbara, to going to school, going to volleyball practice, like just visualizing that. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is like seeing yourself at that level so that it can happen, because it's not just going to happen by chance. Like you actually have to work towards it and make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And if I could go back now with the things I know, as far as like even nutrition and, proper sleep and all these things, I'm like, man, I could have been, like a different level of an athlete with the things that I know now.
I hear you.
Yeah, but definitely, the extra reps do pay off. And I think that's what we don't see even with the professional athletes. Like I'll use Kobe, for example. Like nobody knew how hard Kobe really worked behind the scenes besides himself. Like he was always putting in the extra reps and the time, getting up at 4:00 in the morning before his competitors were, to make himself better, to put himself in a position so that he could be the best that he could be. And I think for elite athletes, that's what really sets us apart, because we do what's required and we do more to make sure that not only we're successful personally, but our team. And I saw that transfer over as I began to go into my career, not only as a school site principal, but as a teacher as well. I was doing the extra behind the scenes because I wanted to make sure that my students were set up for success. And the same thing when I was a principal, I was always doing things so that I would be the best that I could be as a leader, so that my team would be able to shine.
Yeah. That's so important, because when I talk to or speak to student athletes, I ask them, like, they tell me whatever it is that their goal is pro. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, like how often do you practice? Oh, we have practice from 5 to 7. Okay. So you're not practicing. Like the required practice. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about when no one's telling you to practice.
Right.
So I always say, like, that is the key. It's like you have to be doing that, when no one's telling you that, you have to, or you should be, or if it's a time thing. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. And then like moving forward, like getting to Cal State Fullerton, going into your freshman year, and then your freshman year, you have an injury, right? So like, what, you're excited, you're playing D1 basketball. Volleyball, you're getting there, and then injury. Like how was your mindset like going through that process, and even through the recovery as well?
Yeah, so it definitely was a crazy time. It was September of my freshman year. So preseason begins in August. Conference play begins towards the end of September into October. So we were still in preseason play. I had played at a couple of preseason tournaments, and I was actually competing with a senior for a starting position at the time. Mm-hmm. So of course I'm putting in the extra reps. I'm doing whatever the coach wants me to do, like going after everything. And we're out of practice. We had just played on the weekend. It was a Monday practice. And one of the setters had set a slide, which was a set behind. And so it was beautiful set. I mean, it was one of those things. It was like money. If I got there in time, I was going to crush this ball. I did. I got there in time, but I landed wrong, and I landed on my right knee, and I remember falling to the ground, and I thought that my knee was dislocated. Like I'd never had a huge injury before. I'd had, like sprained ankle and things like that, but I've never had injury or a pain or a sound, come out of my body like that before. And so I remember, everybody stopped the play. They got me off to the side. The trainer was looking at it immediately. They had already put ice on it because they weren't sure about the situation either. And at that moment, I was like, oh my God, like what's going to happen? Like that's the only thing I could think of at the moment, was like, am I ever going to be able to play this game again? And so they got me to the training room. They evaluated me. They found out that it was my ACL. And then they sent me to the doctor's office because they wanted to get confirmation on it. And I come back, and I don't know if you've ever seen like the old school ACL braces anyways, like the full leg.
Bulky.
Yes. So here I am on crutches, coming back to the school site. And even prior to me leaving to the doctor's office, this was the hardest thing, is that and again, this is like, cell phones were just becoming a thing. It wasn't like now where you could like FaceTime your parents or text them, because texting was like 10 cents for each text.
And you better call your parents after 9 too. Don't forget.
Right.
Or they're flipping for like $1 a minute.
Yeah, all these regulations, with all that. So I remember going to the coach's office, and we get on their landline, and we're calling my parents, and I just remember like, oh my God, like my mom's gonna flip out right now. And so my mom gets on the phone, and the coaches made me do the talking. All right. So and my mom's like, what's the matter? And I'm just like, I hurt myself. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, my knee, Mom. I think it's dislocated. I'm not sure. I'm going to the doctor, blah, blah, blah. So, and I just remember like bawling at that point, because it was like, I couldn't play anymore. And anytime you talk to your mom, that's how it goes. So anyways, from that process to healing, I came back very quickly. So they decided not to have me have surgery until November, because they wanted me to do some water aerobic therapy beforehand, to make my range of motion better, so that when I had the surgery in November, within 5 months, I was actually back on the court practicing, from ACL and MCL recovery. And even coming back, the hard part about it was that although I was, cleared by the doctor and I was able to compete again, I didn't feel the same. It felt like I was in a different body. I couldn't move like I used to. And I had a hard time of really trusting like that mind body connection and allowing my body to do what it needed to do, because my mind was trying to protect myself from doing it again. So it took a while, that first year back. And again, I still had pain and everything like that. Nothing like before, but if any of you have ever come back from a surgery, it does take some time for your body to, mobilize and do what it needs to do. So that first year back was difficult. I ended up redshirting. And now that I do the athlete transition work, I really found that year was a very, very good taste of reality for me of what life after sports was going to be like. So if any
of you realize it in that moment though?
No, I didn't, because no matter what, like I knew I was going to find a way back somehow. But now looking back, it's really a good depiction of what life after sports was going to be like, because, who was I without my sport? Was I even going to stay at Fullerton? So that goes back to, would you still be at that school, if you weren't on scholarship? Because, an injury can take you out on that as well. And so making my way back, the next year is when I started to really feel better, and back to my normal self. By the time I was a senior, I would say I was definitely back, as I was before, but, still having that scar. I still, of course, have it on my knee today. And it just reminds me that, no matter what hardships come your way, you can overcome it. And there's only going to be like a period of time where you're going to, have to suffer a little bit and figure things out. But the biggest thing that happened too was that I had such a great support system between my teammates, my athletic trainer, my parents. Everybody was cheering me on. And I remember everybody at home, in Oxnard, when they heard that I had gotten hurt, like my coach from high school had reached out to me, all these people like, oh my God, we're so bummed. We were so looking forward to, that first year. But hey, things happen for a reason. It landed me an extra year in a uniform, which I think, in the long term, allowed me to mature a little bit more, even though I still had a hard time with that transition, even after spending an extra year. And what happened within that too, is like, I saw all my teammates, the ones that I was recruited with, my same class, I saw them leave and I was still left behind. And so once I finally did graduate from Fullerton, then I saw people already, starting their graduate program. Some of them had already gotten jobs, and I already felt like, oh my God, I'm behind, like I don't even know who I am. And all these people are, figuring out their lives, which I thought was the case, but really everybody's just trying to figure it out once they're done competing.
Yeah. It's like, we're all on that same journey. It just looks different. And then kind of just staying here at Fullerton, like you had the ACL injury, but then also, because this is something that some of us can experience as student athletes, and I just want to hear, your take on it, is having losing seasons, right? So just so everybody knows, also, like, Sarah also wrote a book, which we're going to talk about as well. And so this is how I learned this. And so it's like, one season you guys were like 5-26. And so, as the competitive nature, who no one wants to lose.
Nope.
and especially like when you're used to winning,
Right.
So how do you use that mindset there? And I'm just thinking of you, of like you said, like you're talking about as a leader, like as a teacher, as a principal, all those things, but you're already starting to incorporate it as a student athlete. So how do you lead as a player when we're losing, and we're losing a lot? Like, how do we keep like motivation here? Like, what does that
Right.
look like?
Well, yeah. So definitely commitment. I'll have to say number one. I'll lead with that word. So this year that you're talking about was my first year back. So my first year season back after the injury. And so it was a young team we had. There were only 2 seniors. Everybody else were freshmen, sophomores, and a sprinkle of juniors. And again, we're playing in the Big West Conference, and age doesn't seem to be a factor sometimes, but experience is. So,
Yeah.
we definitely had some teams we were playing against that had more experience than us. And I remember, at the beginning of the season, we had won 5 games during our pregame. It wasn't in a row, but it was sprinkled here and there. And then it was like a drought. Like there was no win in sight. We got close a few times, but every single weekend we would come back from a loss. And let me tell you, it felt like, it got really old, but that team in that year, even though it sounds awful on paper, that was my favorite year playing. And the reason why was because of that team. And no matter what we did, no matter how badly we lost or how close we got to a victory, we always came back on that Monday with the same drive, the same determination, and the same commitment to one another that we were going to do whatever it took to get better for the next game and learn from the lessons that we had. So anytime there is a loss, there should be lessons. And anytime you win, there should be some lessons there too. But I think a lot of times the win overshadows, the things that, went wrong, of like, what could we do better? So every time we came back to the table, it was like, okay, we got to get stronger. We got to get faster. We got to be able to, have a really good scouting report so that we at least have a chance against our competitor the next week. And yeah, that team, we were just so committed to one another. And we got along really well. And by our last games, our very, very last game of that season, we were playing against UC Riverside at home. And it was a nail biter. We went 5 games, which is the maximum amount, for those of you guys don't know volleyball, that you can play. The last game's to 15. And I want to say we won 15-13 that last game. And you would have thought we won the championship game because everybody was so happy, for us to finally have that moment.
Man, yeah. I know what that's like. I've been on losing teams, so I understand.
Yeah, and it's hard, it's hard, but at the same time, I think there's so many things that you learn about yourself, and grit, is definitely a word that comes to mind for athletes. And I think it really teaches you to have to dig deeper and figure out a way to make it happen. Even if you don't get that W, like I still think that there were games that we had that we won. And in particular, that season we won ourselves because we grew so much as individuals, not just players, but I think individuals that year. And that year in particular, I really feel, and I've had, of some of my former teammates on my podcast, and we've talked about that season, and they talk about how life-changing that one season was in their life to help them prepare for losses in, the real world, right? Like outside of sports later, like how you deal with difficult situations and how you can overcome them.
Yeah. I like that because I feel like it's important to talk about that because we can glorify winning, but there are also teams, like not every team is winning. Not if you play an individual sport, not everybody is winning too. And so it's like, how do you handle that? Because like you said, it transitions into life. And I always say we're going to spend more time in life than we do in sports.
Yes.
Regardless of I was ball is life. My life was always going to be life at the end of the day. I'm experiencing that more than I am, playing basketball or volleyball, whatever it may be. So it's great to have those lessons and see the silver lining in those pieces and have teammates who can do that with you. even if the scoreboard is showing something else.
Right. Yeah. They were a special group, and we all still keep in contact here and there. But, I think it does take a special group of people, because not everybody can do that, and again, it goes back to mindset work. That season, we were also working with our sports psychologist, Ken Revisa, who was just, outstanding. I still go back to things that he said, that season and the seasons after, to like really help us get out of the rut that we were in. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And then like getting closer, like before you start pivoting from the game, and then kind of getting to that awareness of like, whoa, like volleyball's coming to an end, and you're like, who am I going to be after this? And then also you mentioned in your book, like you felt like you went into like a mild depression,
Mm-hmm.
and like party and alcohol. Like, what was that experience like for you? Did you recognize it while you were in it, or was it something that you realized afterwards?
Yeah, I think, kind of in it, like I kind of understood, only because I knew that I was disconnecting from my team. And I think part of it was that I was a year older than everybody else. And like I told you, all the girls I came in with, had already left. And so I already felt kind of like the outcast, just because there was such a big age difference, with some of the girls that I was playing with. I just didn't have that same connection. And so what's hard for the fall sports in particular is that you still have that spring before graduation. And so it's like, okay, I'm not practicing anymore. What am I going to fill my time with? I'm still on full ride, scholarship. So fortunately, I didn't have to work. I could have if I chose to. And I had, little jobs here and there that I did. But for the most part, I decided to focus on school. And that wasn't really a focus. I got by with A's, B's, and a C minus, which at the time didn't feel like it was a big deal. When I graduated, I'm like, okay, here I go. And I moved back home. And when I moved back home, I got a letter in the mail when I was living at my parents' house. So my plan after Fullerton was to move back home, go to the teaching credential program, get on with my life so I could become a classroom teacher. And so I had gone to the mailbox thinking that my official transcript was there. I pull out this letter, and I still remember to this day, it was this bright yellow piece of paper. I open it, and it's from Cal State Fullerton, and it says, "We're so sorry to inform you that your degree has not been conferred." And I was like, what? And they're like, you have to make up the major coursework that you got a C minus in. And I just like, I'm like, you've got to be like, I thought I was being punked, in the mail. Like, you got to be kidding me, because I had an academic counselor. I had my, athletic counselor, like all these people didn't catch it. And the whole reason behind why they didn't catch it was that the Cal State system was just going to the plus minus grading system. And so that was just, flew under the radar. And I remember walking back home, and I was just like, I was so bummed. Like I felt like a loser at that point. I'm like, what am I going to do now? Like I moved back home with mom and dad. I can't even go to school. I'm not going back to Fullerton. Like that wasn't an option. I was like, there's no way I'm going to go back and take that class. So my dad got involved. We ended up calling the dean from the school. We ended up going down there and meeting with them. And they're like, well, there's nothing we can do. She has to retake the class. We're offering summer school. And I'm like, no, I'm not coming back to Fullerton. And the reason why I wanted to say no is because I think it was my pride. I didn't want people to see that, I actually didn't graduate and all that type of thing. So I ended up making up that course at Cal State Channel Islands over here. Finally got into the teaching credential program. But in between that, I ended up going to bartending school because I needed a job. It's something I always wanted to do. And it probably was associated with that last semester of me being in college and getting, more into, the bar scene than anything else. But it gave me an opportunity to make something of myself. And I still look back now, and I honestly, I think that's the best thing that could have happened to me, because up until that point, it's like things were just kind of falling in place for me. Like I got the scholarship, I was able to do this and that. And then that was the first time that I really had a setback. Mm-hmm. And I think having that year of all those losses really helped me to kind of be okay with like, all right, like I'm going to figure this out. But it's going to take me some time. Yeah.
Got it. And I want to let you know you're not alone. And this is just also suggestions just for student athletes now or in the future, is to make sure that you're always on top of these things. Because when I graduated from San Francisco State and I moved back home, they told me that I did not graduate either.
Oh,
And I had
wow.
done the whole process. And it was
Yeah.
because the English classes that I had, one of them I had taken didn't qualify for the degree when I had
Got
been
it.
taking English for
Yeah.
so long. So it's like, well, what do I do now? So I took the English class at the community college at Oxnard, and I was able to use that English class. But it's just one of those reminders. I mean, I didn't think that. I thought I was the only person like, how did this get missed? You know? I'm like,
I
I don't
wasn't
want to take
alone.
another class. So
Yeah.
it's just one of those reminders, like you're seeing two people here that experience
Mhm.
the exact same thing on, different sides of the state. But it's just a reminder just to have like double check, because I mean, I don't really want to take another class when I'm thinking like I'm done.
Right. It's like, right? Like the worst thing ever. Yeah.
I'm like, whew, I went through, and they're like, no, you didn't. You got to take another class. You got to
Right.
get back in school. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
totally hear you on that. And just out there, just like always keep on track of it. Don't think that's the eyes are doing it. Like make sure you understand
Exactly.
what's going on as well, because there's so many resources now that you can see like what you need to do so that everyone's on the same page. But most importantly, that you're on the same page as well. And excuse me, going back to like creating like a clear vision, like you mentioned, like visioning, like you started doing that already
Mhm.
when you were preparing to see yourself driving the car and going to Santa Barbara and things like that. What are some tips that you have about to go about visioning? Like, what does that look like? Is it like those questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then, some people's suggestions are different. They're like, do what you love or do what makes money. Like, what are your suggestions on visioning?
I think part of it first is making sure that you give yourself an opportunity to explore things. And I think being athletes, we don't have the time, quote unquote time to, really explore other things that could be out there for us. And when you're thinking about what you want to do next, it's important to figure out what you like, and athletes are multi-talented. I remember I had roommates and also teammates that could sing. They were able to sew. They were able to create other different things. Like there's other avenues and ventures that you can look into. And when you're thinking about the vision for yourself, like not just saying like, well, I want to have a good paying job. Okay, well, what does that look like? Does that mean that you're going to focus on a specialty? Does it mean that you're going to, what type of house are you going to live in? What you want to be very, very clear and vivid with your vision to the T, like I want to show up at work. This is exactly what I'm going to be wearing. This is what I'm going to be doing. This is a car I'm going to be driving. So going back to the example I had, I was envisioning, and this was my dream car back then in high school, a Volkswagen Jetta. That was like what I wanted. And luckily for me, my parents were amazing. And because I got a full ride scholarship, they gifted that to me when I went to college. So being able to and I remember the first time I got in that car and I was driving, I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I had envisioned for myself, except I thought I was going to be going north to UC Santa Barbara. But I decided to go down south to Fullerton. And so really having a vivid picture of what you want. And as far as your question about, should you pursue your passion, as your main thing or whatever you're going to do, I think it really depends. I think the dream thing is to be able to do what you're passionate about and be able to monetize with it. But there are some people who are still able to, have a job that they enjoy. It may not be like the thing that they absolutely love doing, but it gives them the life that they want. And they're still able to do like their passion and things that they want on the side. So I think it can look differently for people. And if you're looking at getting into like a company or an organization or really anything that you do, getting clear on your core values of who you are, like how you show up as a person, the things that, you want. Like for me, I'm really big on teamwork and being associated with the team. And so that was always something for me when I was working in the corporate world. Like I wanted to make sure that I was in a team like environment, and I wasn't just like working on my own. And even though now, I'm an entrepreneur and I work from home and it's primarily my own business, I don't feel like I'm necessarily alone because I have a great network of people who are part of my team. And so it can look different for you. It just depends on how you want it to feel and how you want it to show up. And you can absolutely have any job out there, but my number one thing is, make sure that it's something that makes you happy. No matter what you do, that you find some type of joy out of it. Even the bartending job that I had back in the day, I had so much fun with that job just because I enjoyed, having conversations with people. I enjoyed helping people, serving people, doing things like that. And so aligning whatever you're going to do with things that light you up and make you happy, I think is the way to go. And no matter what endeavor you go into in your life.
Yeah. And like one of the things you mentioned, like core values, I know there's an echo. I can hear an echo on my end. Do you hear it?
No, I don't. Yeah.
Okay. But you mentioned core values, and that's something that you talk about in your book too. So everybody check out Pivoting from the Game by
Thanks,
Dr.
Michelle.
Sarah. You're welcome. Dr. Sarah Lepe. Go into the rebrandedathlete.com, which we're going to get into all the different ways you can contact Sarah as well. But can you share too more about like how Rebranded Athlete came about? And, I can already start to hear it in your story from your experience as well. And like what you're doing with your company.
Yeah. So again, as I left the game, I remember getting my jersey in a frame from my coaches. We had our little banquet and it was like, thank you very much. Congratulations. There you go. See you later. Next, right?
Yep.
The next group coming in. And after that, it was like, wow, okay. Like, this is done. And I knew that, that was definitely a chapter that was ending for me and I was on to something else. But it wasn't until later on that I realized that there really aren't services or anything out there for student athletes. And again, this is something that has been such a big part of your life. And it feels like it's your whole life because it's usually done towards the beginning of your life. Right. And that's what took me a while to understand too. It's like, the time that you're an athlete is so minute compared to the rest of your life. Like it's literally one season of your life that you are an athlete. And so what I began to realize is that I was different. Even when I had that bartending job, I was out hustling people with bussing tables, making drinks, like, being a leader, like all these different skills were starting to show up and people recognize that. And when I got into being a teacher and a school principal, it was the same type of thing. I was known as, the school administrator that was, big on building relationships and having a team-like environment. And there was no job too small for me when I was a school principal. Like, in fact, people didn't know I was the principal half the time because I was outside, directing traffic. I was mopping the floors when they needed to be. I was picking up trash, like whatever it needed to be, because that's the type of mentality I had as an athlete. Just like when we're on the court, like we fill in wherever we need to, and we know that our team has our back. And that's the type of environment I made as a school principal as well. And so with that, I was like, how many other athletes are like me that still have this type of a skill set, but maybe they don't know how to use it, or they're not applying it, how they should in life after sports. And I began to see, and I mentioned this earlier, there were other school principals where like their school sites were performing really well. And the more I dove into it, I was like, oh my goodness, like they used to be an athlete too. And that person used to be an athlete. And there was like this connection here. And I was like, man, there are so many skills that we have that transfer over that any employer like would love. But the hard part about it is that we leave the game thinking we have no job experience. Right. Like I don't know about you, Michelle, but I had like, little jobs. Like I worked at a yogurt shop. I was like a cashier for a photography studio, and I worked at Linens and Things back in the day, like in the summertime.
Linens and
folding
Things.
Towels. Yeah.
Whoa. I haven't heard that in a long time.
I know, in a long time. Right. So yeah, your listeners probably don't even know what that is. Very similar to Bed Bath & Beyond. And they probably don't know what that is either. But, all these things that, we go out feeling like I have to start from scratch. I don't have any experience. And that's not the case. It's really learning how those skills you have as an athlete transfer over into the workforce and in life. So, if you were a team captain, you've got management experience. Like, you have been able to manage, like in my situation, a team of 15 girls, you're able to help oversee that. Yes, you absolutely have experience. You're coachable, you're goal oriented, all these things that people want. That needs to be presented when you go out on these interviews and you go and apply for these jobs. So I decided to start Rebranded Athlete because I wanted there to be a resource for athletes to know that there is a life beyond sport, and that I was so tired of hearing former athlete, retired athlete, even though I still refer to that because, people need to know what it is. But to me, it sounds like that's what you used to be in the past, right? And that's no longer who you are. I believe as athletes, we are always going to be that athlete, but we have to figure out how we're going to repurpose ourselves, rebrand ourselves into the next season of our life. And we're always going to take with us the life skills, the life lessons that we've learned. And I really feel like us as athletes, like we had such a great opportunity and a great classroom, so to speak, which was our sport, to learn life lessons in. And I still go back to them. I referred to Ken Reviza, our sports psychologist earlier. And one of the things he said that is ingrained in me today is you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And when you think about that, it's like, no better person than an athlete to be able to go into this next season uncomfortable, but being able to figure it out. So Rebranded Athlete is a resource out there for college athletes and also professional athletes to help them figure out how they can take the skill set that they have beyond the game and transfer it into this next season of their life so that they can be, like you said in the beginning, the change leaders in the world. I believe athletes have the ability to change the world. Like, we're the ones that have these skill sets that are so needed, but we just have to figure out what lights us up, what's our passion, so that we can figure out where we need to be in this next season so that we can go out there and help change things for everybody.
Yeah. And I can relate to that because even as, I get to my senior year, I actually had another year left of school at the college university level. And so it's kind of like, oh, like, what do I do? It's like, I still want to be at practice. I still want to, I still want to train. I still want to do all the things that they're doing because that's kind of what I've been doing. And I enjoy it. And so kind of like being that rebranded athlete, like, it's like, well, what do I do now? Like, I want to stay somehow connected to my sport in some way, but maybe there's another passion that lives within inside of me, but it's like, the self-doubt creeps in.
Yes.
Right. Like, this is all I know. Like, how am I going to be good at that? Have you ever experienced like that self-doubt, like outside of sports on yourself? And then like, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I even refer to it like as imposter syndrome sometimes, right? Because we're so good at our sport. We've done it for so long. And I think that's what's hard with athletes is that it comes easier to us because we've had so much experience. And then when you start something new, it's like starting from scratch and you got to figure it out. And so having that self-doubt can creep in for sure, because maybe you haven't refined your skill set yet in whatever it is that you're learning. I still remember my first week as a teacher too. Same thing. I went to school for it, right? But nothing will prepare you for it until you actually get in there and take messy action and start trying. No matter what it is. And I'll never forget my students that first year. I tried so hard to make it seem like I wasn't that first year teacher. And at the end of the year, I told them, I'm like, okay, you guys sit. And I taught sixth grade. So, they could, they could understand things a little bit. And so I was like, all right, you guys, I have something to tell you. And they all sat down and I think they were thinking like, oh my God, is she going to have a baby or something like that? And I was like, well, I have to tell you, this was my first time doing this. And they're like, doing what? I'm like, being a teacher. And they're like, what? And I was like,
oh my gosh.
And I think it's one of those things, like it goes back to mindset, right? And believing that you can do it. And even if you don't believe, do it until it becomes a reality, right? Be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like Ken Ravizza said, fake it till you make it, you know, like whatever you need to do to make yourself comfortable, it will come in time. But again, I think somebody had said it takes like 10,000 hours before you actually are able to master something. So give yourself grace in whatever you do next, and allow, you know, your skill set as an athlete to maybe help accelerate it a little bit.
Right. I mean, but that's kind of what we've been taught as athletes too, right? There was a point where we didn't know, you know, how to be, you know, very skillful at that particular sport and things like that. So it's like we kind of still had to like put that extra practice in, and then, you know, continue to apply it, and then, you know, you see it roll over. And of course, nothing prepares you for your first year as a teacher.
Yes. I was ready to walk away by October, I think, you know, by that time, but I held in there.
Like, where did she go? Oh my gosh. But you talking about, like, you know, the teamwork, and even in your last chapter of your book, you talk about like your new team and how we're constantly building relationships, and teams just don't mean if I played sports, it's work, it's our relationships with family, our partners, whoever that may be. And then, like, what are some like ways that you build like trust and build relationships? Like, I see, is it just because I know you say like you kind of like, you're going to do the sweeping, you're going to mop, like you're going to go the extra mile. So it's like, we don't even know who the principal is, but like, you know, it's like, how do you do that to continue to, like, you know, show like team, and then have everybody also like build around that as well?
Yeah. Well, one of the things is I always saw myself as an equal, right? Like I never saw myself above everybody else. Like, just because, yes, I had that title of school principal, that means at the end of the day, I'm the one that had to make the final decisions. It didn't mean that I was the expert in all areas. And I think that's why I was so successful with my team, is because I really leaned into them and gave them the opportunity to be the experts in whatever they did. And whatever job needs to be done. And the culture that I built with that, I look back now, which is so awesome, because it wasn't just me, because I was leading by example with that, but other people saw like, hey, like she's helping out here, I can also, you know, help out this department too. So then you had like the cross of people, and then that's when the relationships are built and the trust are built, because then you start seeing, you know, like, hey, this person's going to help me, I will also help them too. And that's the beauty of a team. And as athletes, that's what we did as well. I'm sure there were positions that, you know, sometimes you had to play that you didn't want to.
Right.
Right. That you had a man down or whatever the situation was, or maybe the coach just wanted to mess with you and say, hey, why don't you try that out?
Good old mind games. Yeah. But my question, since you've been starting like and doing Rebranded Athlete, have you talked to any coaches, like when you speak to them about what you're doing? Is there like is there an awareness of like, we really don't have that like transition system for the pivot after? It's like you said, it really is like you get your plaque, you have a banquet, and we're busy with our next group, like, you know. So is there an awareness of this? Have you learned that, or like what's your experience?
Well, I think a few things here. So there are coaches that are very aware of it and are very much for it. There are some coaches that are like, yeah, I know that's needed, but I want my players to focus on playing right now. Like, we don't need to be talking about life after sports right now, because I need them playing today. So I think that's part of the problem, is that the overlap with it, and how, you know, I really think, you know, when you're talking about player development, like, we're not just focused on what the player can do in the game, but them as a whole individual. And I think once that kind of comes into play, where the player is feeling comfortable on the court, and they also have a sense of relief, like, yeah, I feel like I'm going to be supported, or I have some sort of a plan as I leave the game or figure out what's next. I think that's when the players can actually elevate their play, because they feel like, you know, I know things are going to be taken care of later, and right now I'm going to play the best to my ability. And it just depends. You know, I've talked to a few universities that are definitely for it. They know that this is a program that they need. But what happens sometimes is funding, so that's one of the things I've had to be a little bit more creative with, as far as, what other resources are out there for universities to be able to tap into have these types of services, because they're very much focused on the players coming in that recruiting process, but not so much the players as they leave and go out. And some of them do hit on, some of the skills that they may need for interviews and different things like that. But again, that's only going to get you so far. I got a job after college too, but it didn't help me deal with the loss and the identity loss of, I am no longer Sarah, the volleyball player. Who am I now without my sport? And that, I think, is so important to build that connection with former players. So then in turn, we talk about all these alumni things. I'm sure, Michelle, you've probably gotten tons of calls from your university. Every year they want us to donate. Like if there was a better connection, I think there might be more of like an alumni connection as well too, and people wanting to come back and give back to the universities if there was more resources for them.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Definitely on the alumni connection. I suggest somehow like there needs to be something, even like somehow build a connection with the current coach, because as we know, coaches come in and out, but I still have a connection to the school, right? Like I don't necessarily, if I didn't play for that coach, then I don't have that connection anymore, but it's the school and the experience. And then we always love to like give back, like we can relate to each other as a student athlete, regardless of the sport. So I feel like that is so important to kind of find a way to keep that. And then you can have the alumni pour back into your program. So then you can pay for those resources. Because I agree with you. Like it's so true. Like I felt like the lost athlete, because I'm not ready to let go, but it's almost like, okay, Michelle, but it's time to let go, like, and you have this in your book too, as well, where you talk about, like the different athletes, right? You have like the lost athlete, the stuck athlete, the rebranded athlete. And so it's just so like important to even have that conversation as little as, hey, what do you feel like as we're coming into this? Because once again, the person matters, right? And I don't get how we ignore that, because wins and losses are going to go, but our people are going to continue to be. And it's one of those things where it's like, if we're like, oh, we care about our community and we have outreach going on in the community or whatever, but it's like, these people are going to be part of your community. Like, how are we building them up to like actually help them do part of the work too, right? Because if I'm like, I don't know, then I'm going to be, I don't know, like sitting on the couch trying to figure it out. And I could be helping support that community, like in the city of the schoolers or wherever I go back to. So yeah, it's so important what you're doing, because that is definitely not a conversation that happens. And I felt lost. Like,
it's unsettling, it really is. And I think we're at a point now, I mean, we played a long time ago and there's still not enough resources, and I think that's the shift that needs to change, especially with, the up and coming athletes and what has been brought to the table, even with mental health awareness with athletes. What a better time than now to really bring that support, so that they know that this is, again, just one season, one fraction of your life. You have your whole life ahead of you. And this is just one moment in time right now for you to, figure things out. And what better way than to have the support of your teammates and coaches to help you, get to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I totally love what you're doing and totally relate. And
thank you.
Like you said, it's kind of amazing that we're still trying to figure it out as we go. But then I want to talk about how you've actually come full circle with your bartending, because you actually have your own bartending business now.
I do.
I want you to share about that, because you have your Rebranded Athlete, but then also like your bartending business. And hey, if somebody's looking for like someone to host their party or whatnot, then I want you to, share what you're doing, Sarah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk about coming full circle, right? So the first job I had out of college, the only job I could get at the time is actually another business I developed this year. And so again, like I told you, I left my full-time position as a principal to go into Rebranded Athlete full-time. I did that and I'm still continuing to do it. But the thing about it is this has opened a door of entrepreneurship. First of all, business was never on my radar. I just want to be clear about that. Like, I had no intention to ever start my own business until I did Rebranded Athlete. And now that has just given me an opportunity to see things differently in the world, see that there's problems I can solve and different things that, I'm good at. So we talk about, these hidden talents or skills. I had no idea I was good at bartending until I actually became a bartender. And it's something even to this day, that brings me so much joy. I actually love making handcrafted cocktails. And so my husband, Andy, and I earlier this year, there was a reel that came across on Instagram, how you're just going through the feed, and all of a sudden this mobile bar came up, and it was this girl out in Atlanta, Georgia, and she had this horse trailer that she had redone, and there were all kinds of like exotic looking drinks and stuff, and it was at a wedding, and I was like, oh my God, that is so cool. Like, how awesome would that be to do? So that's what initiated the spark. And Andy and I had talked about it. I was like, this would be something really cool to do. So eventually we want to get our own trailer and hook that up. But for now, I created Cali Soul cocktails. So it's California inspired cocktails using local handcrafted fresh ingredients. And so what we do is we bring the bar to you. We go to different events and venues. We started in May, really with the intention of, let's get a couple of, events under our belt. Our very first event that we booked was actually the Oxnard High School reunion. We had nothing together, and we had told them about the idea, and they're like, yeah, let's go for it. And so from that point to now, we've done over, I want to say like 25 events, and it is just
awesome.
Growing. Yeah, it is so much fun.
Sounds like it. Wow, that's awesome. So you got like, you're just coming full circle in a lot of ways, like not even like just with like Rebranded Athlete, the bartending, the high school or 20-year high school reunion.
Yes. Everything's coming together.
Wow. And so what's next? Like in your visioning, like what do you see like next, like coming up the pipeline for you? What do you see for yourself?
So I got a few tricks up my sleeve. So I saw the comment went out. I want to be a tester. Yes, anytime. Come and try our drinks, Maria. Oh man, but yeah. So I have a couple of tricks up my sleeve. I started my podcast 2 years ago, and as a result, I had a lot of people reach out to me after I had guests on there, and just people that I met within the athlete transition space. People are like, hey, how did you get your podcast going? Because I had a whole guest experience and everything, and like, hey, can you help me with it? And so what I decided to do this year as well, so I have 3 businesses going. The third one is a podcast strategy business. So I'm helping business owners who have been in business for a year or more become the authority in the space by creating a podcast. And I'm so glad I'm on a live podcast today as well, because our live show, because that's actually what I want to focus on. I want to do more live podcasts and show people how easy it is to do these types of things to really grow within the space, grow connections. If I didn't have my podcast with Rebranded Athlete, I don't believe I would have had the success that I had. I was able to meet people within the space, have them on my show, have Olympians, former major league baseball players. I had Brock Johnson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's on Instagram. He's like a big time influencer on there. I had seen a Instagram reel from him, saw that he went to UC Davis, and I was like, you know what? Let me reach out to him and see if he'd want to be on the podcast. Sure enough, I had him on. I mean, he's got like 500,000 people following him on Instagram. So I think the lesson there too is no matter what you're doing, don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to reach out to people. And I think we're in such a great space right now to be able to have resources and people at our fingertips that we wouldn't be able to, in our small community, Ventura County. I don't think I'd be able to have as many connections if it wasn't for the internet and, being able to do things like this. So I'm creating that podcast strategy business to coincide with Rebranded Athlete. I'm actually going to be revamping my podcast for season 3 coming up. Michelle, I'd love to have you on, but we can talk about that.
Of course.
Yeah. But and revamping the academy that I have as well. So I have a coaching program that I do. I'm looking at making a more affordable kind of self-paced option for college athletes. And then I also do one-to-one coaching with college athletes, professional athletes. And I do have a couple of things in the works with universities, because even with Fullerton, I'm trying to do a pilot program with them so that my curriculum will be part of their program as the athletes are going out. So I'm really, really excited about that, to have that be something, that comes about.
Wow, you're doing such an amazing things. And so speaking of like reaching out and the connection, like share with us the different ways that we can get in contact with you, reaching out to you, regardless if it's Rebranded Athlete, we got questions, podcasts, Cali Soul cocktails, whatever it may be.
Sure. Yeah.
Want to be a tester, all that stuff.
Yes. Let's see how we can arrange that too. So definitely the best place to connect with me is on Instagram for all my businesses, Rebranded Athlete. If you want to connect from there from today. You can also visit my website, rebrandedathlete.com. I do have books for sale on there. You can also find them on Amazon. If you buy directly from me, I will be able to hand sign and autograph them for you. And if you're interested in even just scheduling a time to chat, reach out to me. I'd love to connect with you. Again, that's where things get started, is just by reaching out and asking questions. And even though, I may not have all the answers, I was an athlete, I've gone through the transition process, and we can definitely figure out things together as you begin to figure out who you are without your sport. And even if you're currently competing, if you're still an athlete right now too, you have questions, or you're going into college. If you're a high school athlete, you have questions about the recruiting process, like send me a DM on Instagram, or go to the website and you can find my email address on there as well. And for those of you who are curious about the cocktails, Instagram, Cali, it's CALISOL, soul, like the sun. Cali Soul Cocktails is our Instagram handle on there. So you can see all of our latest creations. And again, that's like my fun passion project on the weekend. And it's fun to see where that business is going to go.
Awesome. And like, even while you were speaking, I was just thinking about like how, we can reach out and talk to you about, the transition, the pivot from the game. But also what I thought about is like, even if you feel like I've been playing it, I still have years to play, but I'm actually ready to pivot now, because that's another one of those things where it's like, oh, I've been doing this for so long, but I actually, love computers or whatever it is. But I've also had this, well, I'm Michelle, the basketball player. So how can you go and tell everybody now that you want to go into culinary school?
Right.
It's almost like a mind game within ourselves. So there's pivoting doesn't happen your senior year. The pivot can happen at any time. And to be able to have someone to talk to about that is really important, because it can be a little jumbled, especially when everybody sees you as something. But
Exactly.
yet, inside I am many things.
Exactly. And that's definitely why I named that book Pivoting from the Game instead of Pivot, because there's so many different times in your life that you are going to have to transition. And it's not just when you leave the game, there'll be different changes. And, kind of what you alluded to here, even like a career change, right? Or something different that you want to do. You're going to have to learn how to, have the confidence within yourself, know and trust the process, and go after what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excellent. So everybody go ahead and reach out. And then a couple more things before you go. So my last question to you is, what is something that you're proud of yourself that has happened within this week? So I guess yesterday or today.
Oh man, proud of myself. Yeah. Well, I would say, no matter what, like I show up every day with an intention. And this week I'm actually focusing on that new podcast business that I'm doing. So each day I've been working on that, getting myself set up so that I'm ready to launch and go for success. So putting in the work, putting in those reps when nobody's watching.
I love it. Keep doing it. And then you just have to finish this sentence. This is going to be the last thing before we go. I am grateful for.
I'm grateful for my husband. Honestly, he's been like the saving grace for me and has been so supportive through everything. So grateful for him.
Awesome. Great job, Andy. Well, thank you, Sarah, for being on the Mind Right Game Tight Show. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Mind Right Game Tight Show. Please continue. If you miss an episode, go ahead and check it out on mindrightgametight.com or go to your favorite podcast channel, whether if it's Spotify, Apple, or Google, type in Mind Right Game Tight, and you can check it out, if you prefer podcasts. After that, have a great day. Treasure yourself and shine.